Sorry. So, Mariya, are you with us?
Yes. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I can't see you yet. Can you see us? Ah, we can see you now. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Everything clear at your end now? You can see us?
Yes.
I apologize for
see
that
you.
in my case. So, Mariya
Thank you.
Stoilova.
Oh,
Mariya Stoilova from the London School of Economics and Political Science, my alma mater, is going to talk to us about parental control tools. Please, Mariya, go ahead.
thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be with you, even from rainy London. I'm going to talk to you about the paper we just published literally 2 days ago, hot off the press, with colleagues Monica Bolter and Sonia Livingstone. So when we were working on age verification, we looked at parental controls because we thought that they were more established, and we wanted to see what the lessons were from that field, something that we can transfer for the development of age verification tools. So in terms of children growing up in a digital age, we see that a host of tools are being developed to cover different areas of their life, to support parents in raising children, to support children's learning and education, and most of all to protect their safety, which seems to be a main concern not only of parents and families, but also of government, and a lot of efforts are rightfully focused on that area. We also notice with the development of such tools, they're often data-driven, and they're AI-powered in their mechanisms of how they complete their task. And we heard earlier from Sonia about maybe the possible dangers around AI and the things we should consider when implementing such solutions. But what is interesting with parental controls is they're often promising a silver bullet solution to a whole host of risk-related factors and concerns. And they seem to be often claiming that this is the solution to all problems when it comes to children's online safety. So me and my colleagues were wondering, like, what is the evidence behind that? And can we actually see this happening in practice? So if you do a very quick search on parental control examples, you can see many of them. There are different tools provided with a different functionality, and it's often quite difficult to distinguish which one is better or to use if you're a parent, for example. They all tend to offer some form of parental monitoring, which also include limiting of devices functionality or activities of children online. They tend to offer or claim to offer protection against all risk online, or four particular areas. We call them the 4 C's of online risk, which relate to content, contact, conduct, and contract. They offer sometimes, especially the newer solutions, they have some advanced features, which for me personally seem to go beyond the monitoring functionality and include something that I could personally call shadowing. So at the bottom of the screen, you can see, this is unfortunately not a fake example. It's something I took from one of the apps that I very quickly came across. Is features which are quite invasive. You can read all the social media chats of children. You can review the text, even the deleted ones, see all the pictures they send or receive. And all this is done, this particular app is quite promoting this aspect, that is done without it being detected. So it's very easy for a parent, I think, to try to make a decision of where to draw the line of what functionalities are useful or not. But very often it's very little support to make a decision around that. And I can also say that there's also very little evidence of which part of these functionalities are helpful and which not. And AI is quite often used to do tasks like scanning text and social media and images and video and so on. So I just want to warn about the danger of potentially commercializing parental safety concerns in this industry, and not to allow this to happen as well in the AV industry. So When we were doing the evidence review, we had over 1,500 sources that we looked at, which gradually we reduced to 40 studies that we considered had something important to say in relation to parental controls. I'm not going to go into the methodology. It was a vast methodology. You can follow up it's published online. So you can read about that. But we were particularly interested in two specific questions from these studies, which families use parental controls and why, and also what are the outcomes, beneficial or otherwise, from using parental controls. So to go very quickly to the answer of the first question, in terms of the context of why these are used, we found 4 particular areas that explain why families might use them or not. So the first one is child development and family needs. So in relation to that, it makes sense that parents were choosing these solutions, these technical tools, when they were having more children. They were trying to limit the functionality of the tools for each specific needs, and they were trying to fit the needs of the family in their circumstances. Especially to supervise younger children, for example, parents tended to use these more because restrictions seemed more acceptable in these circumstances. The second factor that was quite important and explained the use of parental controls was related to the digital skills and the technology used within families. So it seems that the evidence suggested younger and more digitally skilled parents tend to use parental controls more. So that seems to speak to how digitally competent parents are and how well they are using the internet and digital technologies themselves, even though there was some evidence that even lower education parents use those technologies. So risk aversion and safety, quite predictably, was one of the areas that explained the use in the circumstances of the use, because parents use these tools when they want to reduce the exposure to online risk of their children. Interestingly here, we found that the perception of the parents of the risks, so how significant the risk is, and how likely their child is to face online risks, made particular importance for their decision to use those tools. So parents who thought that there are a lot of risks that the children might face, or risks that were substantial for them, for example, like pornography that's been used as an example today, they tended to use parental controls more. And the last area was parenting values and parental mediation. So it mattered what parents believed about their role for their children's internet use, whether they thought that they can contribute to better children's internet use, how engaged they were in their children's internet use. Also, parents who liked to have rules in general preferred to use those tools, versus parents who were more authoritative in their parenting, or parents who were particularly worried about their children's autonomy or privacy. They tended to avoid the parental control tools. So what are the things that we can consider from this? The first obvious point is that parental controls prioritize children's safety. We heard from Sonia early on about the different areas of children's rights. But safety is one of these areas. So these tools tend to prioritize this area over other areas like privacy or participation or agency, and this is something to consider. We also saw that the evidence suggested parents might lack the necessary skills or knowledge, so they would need training to be able to use these technical tools, and not all of them will be equally equipped to do that. I also think that it shifts the burden to parents and families to regulate children's internet use and risk, and I don't think that's a fair request to make. So we probably need age verification to do something more on top of that. And we see that this is not a solution for all families, because some families, just because of the skills, the way that they use technology or their beliefs, just did not prefer these kind of technical solutions. So on to the second question, which for us was important. We wanted to know whether these tools are effective. They've been around for a while. There were many examples of them being used, as you saw in one of the previous slides, but we wanted to know whether they're effective in what they're promising to achieve. And we found that actually there are 4 types of outcomes from using parental control tools. some of beneficial or protective outcomes. Some of the studies show that there's no change in the outcomes, so there was no positive or negative change. But other studies also show that there's limiting outcomes or adverse outcomes. And I'm going to go through these very quickly. So in relation to the parental controls, we found 17 articles, 17 studies that showed beneficial or protective outcomes, and most of them concerned the reduction of different types of online risks. So the content risks, there were studies showing that there's reduced access to pornographic or sexual content, reduced access to materials related to eating disorders or self-harm, and also reduced access to violent or hate messages online. There were also effective, some of the studies show that they were effective to conduct risks. So things like reduced cyberbullying, victimization, or cyber aggression was witnessed in some of the studies. Problematic online gaming or illegal downloading was also reduced by some of the applications. Much less often, contract risks were considered in some studies, but fewer showed that parental controls reduced misleading videos or advertising that children face. Interestingly, we didn't find any studies that showed that looked, in fact, as contact risks. These are the so-called stranger danger, things that parents are particularly worried about, but we didn't find any evidence that shows that parental controls can actually help against that. On the positive sides, we found studies which show the rise of positive practices. For example, improved time management, improved parent-child communication, or better identification when the child actually needs help. However, that, as I said, is not the full picture. So there's a big but that we need to consider. So the reported effect sizes of the studies were generally small overall, and the data was mostly correlational, so we cannot claim that there's effects or causality in those effects particularly. We also saw from the studies that sometimes there are other factors that are in operation or at play in addition to the parental controls. So in one of the studies, for example, there were media literacy initiatives going alongside this. So some of the effects could be due to that. In other studies, there was a mixture of technical tools that were implemented, and parental controls were only part of what they were looked at, but the effects were not unpicked for each of the individual tools. And we also saw sometimes that there were effects that varied by different populations or by countries, for example, showing that the same measures cannot be replicated. So there's something else going on that can be explained. Also, many studies showed mixed outcomes. Which is also not very assuring. And we also saw that the links between the affordances and the benefits were unclear. And what I mean here is that the studies didn't often describe what the functionality is, did not even sometimes say what kind of apps they were using in their assessments. So if there are good lessons to be learned from the practice, they're not often in terms of the functionalities and what exactly is helpful. So if you remember when I was showing the apps at the beginning, and I mentioned the different types of functionalities, we don't really understand which ones are the necessary ones and the ones that do make a difference, and which are a bit excessive or maybe unnecessary. And we also saw that quite a lot of studies showed that there was no change in the outcomes, including no effects in risk reduction. And perhaps most worryingly, we found that there's limiting and adverse outcomes that some studies demonstrate. For example, in relation to limiting outcomes, we saw that parental control in some cases can lower the overall internet use. They can lead to reduction in privacy or autonomy. They can restrict access to some beneficial activities, but a lot of studies here pointed to the freedom of socializing online. For example, one study showed how children decide not to message their friends because they know that their parents will be looking at the messages, so it leads to some isolation. And maybe most worryingly, we found that studies point to adverse outcomes, such as increasing of family conflict, erosion of trust, reduction of child autonomy or privacy, and sometimes over blocking of innocent contact, which, for example, can impact children's learning. So just to wrap up, some of the lessons that we could learn and maybe apply to the age verification is that in our case, parental controls had very mixed effect, while some of the stories were quite positive and promising and showed better protection. A substantial number of studies show that there's no effect or adverse effect opposite of what was intended. So we can argue that the use of technical measures is not a standalone practice. Whenever the studies found that it was more efficient, it was when it was embedded in family relationship, in negotiation between parents and children. Children knew about them and they were on board with these measures. So with any technical measures, this is really important to have in mind the parental mediation of digital access, but also family lives and children's role in this. And to function effectively, we know that technical measures must be age appropriate and to address the needs of both children and parents. And we're coming to the argument that Sonia made about consulting children, which the study didn't often do. So these are the couple of publications that you can follow up for any more details on what I was just saying. And thank you very much for listening, and we're looking forward to hearing what kind of messages you think this will apply to the AV also context. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I ask a question first and abuse my position as chair?
Of course.
Did you look at did you look at any studies that tried to evaluate the differences between the different programs? Or, I mean, was there one set of safety tools, for example, that stood out as better than or delivering better outcomes than others? I ask in part because if you remember, or if you are aware of it, you never hear an airline advertising itself by saying fewer people get killed if they fly with us, yeah? Because there is an agreement, or there was an agreement across the whole of the airline industry many, many years ago that they would never advertise safety records as a feature of the service that they provided. Because actually all you would be doing if you did that was be reminding people of the inherent danger, potentially at any rate, of flying. And in a way, what we ought to, speaking as a child protector, what we ought to be aiming at is something similar in the online space, so that it shouldn't matter in a way. The environment should be as safe as it possibly can be, full stop. But maybe that gets us back to the question about, were there any programs that came out better than others, or were you just looking at the meta studies? This was a meta-analysis of existing studies, so that didn't come up in a granular way.
We were looking for all sorts of evidence. There was some meta-analysis in some individual studies. So some of the good examples, I would say, were the ones that actually were very clear about their design and what exactly they're measuring. And there was a good link between the methods of the measuring and the outcomes. So they were assessing their effectiveness. We were very anxiously looking for the golden dust, if I can call it that. I think this is what you're trying to provoke me to give you. What are the kind of top 10 maybe design solutions that we can provide as guidance? Unfortunately, I don't think there was anything that was coming up strongly from all these studies. As I was saying, there was a lot of vagueness around the actual specificity, the technical specifications of the tool that were being used. So the transferable lessons are, I think, a little bit muddled up because of that lack of clarity and specificity. And because of the differences of the different technical solutions in the way that they were provided, they were quite specific to what they were doing. So comparing pears with apples is quite difficult to do. But one of the things that I can highlight that came through a little bit more strongly was that it needed to be flexible. It needed to meet family needs for different ages of children, for example, for different family contexts, and something that allows active engagement of parents and children together, an understanding and mutual agreement that these tools will help children's safety, and children have to be on board with it. So there were some examples when children were consulted in the process of development, and these seem to be the better examples, an example that were better, because if children decide to to find a workaround. We know that they will. I mean, the technical partners I spoke earlier, they knew this and they warned us against this. So we need to get not only parents but children on board for all the measures that we are implementing for them.
Thanks. So, Tony, your next standards project is a standards project on parental control software. So, any questions from anybody online or in the room for Marissa?
We do have a comment online, which I'll just sort of convey from
Mariya,
Dr. Rachel O'Connell. It's imperative not to confuse parental controls and the legal requirement to obtain parental consent to process children's data. It's also important to recognise that age assurance and the legal requirement, GDPR, COPPA, Digital Services Act, to obtain parental consent before processing children's data firmly places the responsibility to ensure children viewing age-appropriate content back to the platforms and arguably will reduce the need for standalone parental controls. Mariya, I don't know if you want to sort of comment on that perspective.
Yes, absolutely. This is something that we have been arguing throughout, that parental consent is very different from parental controls, and these should not be mistaken. I think that if you look at the work of Professor Simone van der Hoef, the reports that she wrote for EU consent were particularly on this and really nicely unpacking where the legal requirements begin and where the additional requirements might be seen. I think these will continue to exist together, age verification and parental control, and they do serve slightly different purposes. I think what is important in both cases, and I can draw comparisons here of the two, is that we need strong evidence of what is sufficient and what is necessary, and especially for different types of content, what is the minimum and most privacy preserving solutions of these technical tools is something that we need to look at. But also, yes, absolutely, in terms of illegal content, we need stronger regulations, we need stronger technical solutions that give children, that not only estimate but give more certainty in estimation of the children's age, for example, to be able to access or not. And whenever it's not needed, it's not legal requirement, it is not needed for children's safety, we need lighter measures, absolutely. We should not confuse those.
And if I may, I have a sort of question. Did you notice any sort of cultural differences? Because looking at a lot of the US state level legislation, and there were 144 bills before state legislatures in the last 12 months alone requiring some form of age check online. Quite often they are, there's a strong bias towards parental consent, not only for, children under 13, but even, children as old as 17 wanting to open a Facebook account requiring their parents' consent. And in some cases, I think you alluded to one, giving parents full access to everything they do on a social media account. Is that something you saw a different attitude to from in the US compared to elsewhere in the world?
Yes, definitely. You're taking me back to a slide that I actually took out because of time, but I don't think I can remember something specifically comparing US versus others, but there was definitely things that we looked in relation to the different European countries, EU consent being a European project. The project EU Kids Online, which Sonia Livingstone led some years ago, and it's been going on looking at children's online risks and opportunities in Europe, actually asked parents as well, what were their attitudes, when do they think that their child will be old enough to make their own decisions, and what they thought about parental control tools. So there was definitely cultural differences in how parents responded. The age of digital consent, if you want to call it that, when they think that the child will be big enough to make their own independent decisions, varied significantly between the countries. Overall, from the age of 11, parents started to think that they might be old enough. But in some cases, 16 or 17, parents still thought that they should be engaged in this. There was also differences in their attitudes in relation to how they thought they can manage parental control tools, whether they feel that they provide children safety. Overall, parents thought that it will make it easier for them and to be more certain that they're doing enough for children's safety. But on the other hand, in some countries, quite a lot of parents were worried about issues related to privacy or autonomy. So definitely there is a cultural difference. The US itself tends to emphasize more parents' rights, if we can call it that, versus children's rights. So the emphasis is on parenting. For me, that's a very different context, for example. But yeah, we do need solutions that can fine-tune these kind of cultural differences and offer something that works in circumstances when parents might think differently about what their children should be accessing or not. Obviously, we're not talking about illegal content, but for things that were a bit more down to the parent, they did want, and I think our own qualitative research in EU consent found the same, that parents want to have a say in what their children do online.
Thank you. I think I agree that there's place for both age assurance, where the responsibility is on the platform, and for parental controls. But it's a real big mistake to think it's a like-for-like swap if you switch from one to the other. Thanks very much for that question, John.
I wrote, many years ago, I was a lawyer, an academic lawyer, and I wrote quite a big piece at one point on the differences between the jurisprudence of the American courts and the jurisprudence of European courts on the question of children's rights. And it's very, very simple. Parents' rights are superior to children's rights in the United States. It's federal and it's under federal law. I'll give you one very quick example. A child with a heart defect, right, required an operation. The parents would not agree to the child having the operation, even though the operation was life-threatening. The child went for respite care at weekends to another family, good people. They went to court and managed to persuade a judge that at least for that weekend, they were the parent. And the judge said, yes, you are this weekend. They gave consent to the operation to be carried out, and it was carried out. There was a legal challenge, and the court said, somebody sued on behalf of the child to say that the state should somehow have intervened, and the court said, no, the parents' rights trump those of the child's. I mean, it's inconceivable that there's a court in Europe where a similar decision could or would be taken. But in America, absolutely. It's not to say children don't have certain legal rights, which can't be trumped by their parents. But the jurisprudence of American courts is very clear about parents having superior rights to children in a way that just isn't completely inconsistent with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and completely inconsistent with